This is the beginning of the fall of the Economic Freedom Fighters, the party that came in South Africa's politics by the storm, targeting the poor youth and unemployed, the desperate, the landless, and most importantly, the dis-scrambled members of the African National Congress.
The biggest winner in this early round, what we're seeing is that Umkhonto Wesizwe is blowing up KwaZulu-Natal. They're in charge, they are large, they're destroying. Remember what I said, the biggest mistake that the ANC made was the persecution of Jacob Zuma. That was a big mistake. It should have been handled internally, should have been handled diplomatically. Bona now, what's happening? Bona the data, the numbers, the stats, check the statistics. Check the statistics. They're being cooked, fam. They're being cooked. So that's something that they should be worried about as things stand right now. Right, the EFF, it looks as if they're not having a great day in the early results. They're just reaching that 100,000 mark and they're running behind what the expectations and the projections would be. Why is this happening to the EFF? KwaZulu-Natal is also a factor for them. Umkhonto Wesizwe, I didn't think it was going to happen. I was wrong. I thought that Umkhonto Wesizwe was just going to take the ANC's lunch and not so much the EFF's lunch. But Umkhonto Wesizwe is taking everybody's lunch, everybody's biscuits, everybody's juice. All of the children are crying in the playground now because Umkhonto Wesizwe is the only one eating. Umkhonto Wesizwe is the only one eating in this election in a big way. For a new party to come in this strong, I don't think it was possible. I don't think we're going to do it.
I want to also have a conversation about the EFF, and joining us in studio is Regotsofetsi Chikane, who is our local analyst for today. The EFF came in 2014. Yep. They secured 6.35% of the vote, becoming the third biggest party in Parliament. 2019, they grew to 10.8% of the vote, nearly doubling the number of seats as well in Parliament. 2024, of course, some of the results still outstanding, and listening to what Granville had to say there about the metros and the results from the metros still outstanding. But what is the story of the EFF?
Yeah, so for the EFF, outside of the big story that the ANC, is not going to get their 50%, I think the EFF are the second biggest losers from this election. The EFF came into this election really emboldened with the idea of becoming an official opposition, and if not, becoming a lot closer to the DA. The belief that the EFF solely kind of captured the mood of the left of SA's politics, or those who were really fed up with the ANC but didn't want to vote for the DA. The young, the most marginalized, the poor, those who are poverty-stricken, they really wanted to be the voice of the voiceless in society. And they come into this election and they find out that, no, this constituency really just wants to go for someone else, right? That they've had their, for lack of a better phrase, their lunch has been eaten in KZN. Where they thought they would get massive growth has all gone to the to the MK party. The silver lining, and I know that EFF will be really holding on to this point, is asking this question of, can we bounce back in the metros in particular? And do we believe that MK will plateau with their voter increase as metro votes come in, right? So we're not seeing any votes for the MK party in major metros. And I think the EFF will really be asking the question about how can we make inroads. At this point, if I'm not mistaken, the EFF and MK are right on track and are head-to-head with each other when it comes to numbers, with MK just ahead of them. Mm-hmm. And I think EFF is really going to be looking for an extra 400,000 votes from the metros to really get them, to that 1 million mark, which would be a huge figure for them, and to push on to become the third major opposition party in the country.
Yeah, and since the launch of the EFF in 2013 and 2014, when they were contesting the elections, the characterization of the EFF was that it is a young, vibrant political party that is targeting the young voter. But is it able to retain that young voter as they move into the senior adulthood?
Yeah, so what we found out is that the EFF generally has quite a hard ceiling to its voter base. They would dispute this, but they also know it as well, that when people turn about 28, 29, they stop voting for the EFF or withdraw their membership from the EFF or make a pivot in just political consciousness, political ideology. Some say it is people getting older. I like saying that it's because people start paying taxes and they start wondering what's going to happen with my taxes. So the EFF has a huge comparative advantage to other parties, that they're able to get young voters en masse. Not many political parties have the strength of the EFF to mobilize young unemployed youth in particular. The real question facing the EFF is, how do you hold that grouping as they get older? how do your policies ensure that it doesn't just speak to the unemployed South African, but also the young professional in the workplace? EFF will say that no, the spirit of the EFF has allowed young professionals to voice out their concerns within the workplace. I've heard this quite a few times from them. But the question then comes about, well, what about the types of taxes that young professionals get, the types of opportunities they get? We're talking about what are the SMMEs that really want to expand their businesses, not small kind of informal businesses. We're talking about people who want to open up tech hubs, for instance. How does the EFF contend with that particular grouping? And I think the EFF is going to learn from this election that there is a need to mature your base and expand your base, or find out exactly where your base is. And right now it is unclear where the EFF's base is. And as we're seeing from this election, having a base in a province is one way to become quite popular in the country.
Yeah. And here's the thing, though. 2014, when they came in, they managed to become the official opposition in the in the northwest, as well as Limpopo. 2019, also then becoming the official opposition in Mpumalanga. Is this party still able to grow, though, and become an official opposition in another province? And I'm even wondering about, when you look at the figures coming out of Mpumalanga, whether the MK party would eclipse the EFF to become the opposition.
Yeah, so I mean, we can go province by province very quickly. So Limpopo, I don't think the EFF has ever really thought that there would be a formidable opposition, right? The ANC's dominance in Limpopo is quite strong, but having a role of usurping the DA there is quite important for them. When we think about Mpumalanga in particular, Mpumalanga has traditionally been quite an ANC stronghold, right, of note. So the EFF at the time, taking Mpumalanga in 2019, was a strong marker of essentially saying, we are coming here, we're eating into your particular base and role in Mpumalanga as well. Coming into this elections, this recomposition of the ANC, its divide between MK and ANC, is really frustrating the plans of the EFF. When it comes to the Northwest, they should still be the official opposition. I think they've kind of entrenched themselves in that position. The question then becomes, the EFF came into this election saying, give us a chance to govern. Give us a chance to show you that we can lead a province. That has been the EFF's mantra over the last 2 years.
Government in waiting.
A government in waiting.
Yep.
That we aren't just radicals, we're not just shouting that we have experience. And they've been touting it's the city of Ekurhuleni in particular as an example of this. So to not get this opportunity during this election puts into question about EFF, what is your plan now for the next 2 years going to local elections and your next 5 years going to national elections? Are you still representative? Do you still represent the youth vote? Do you still represent the idea of a left-wing organization in the country that is ready to govern? Or are you just another opposition party like UDM or the IFPs of the world?
Yeah.
And that's an existential risk for them.
One of the key election factors going into these elections, of course, there was the economy, corruption, but also foreign nationals. And the EFF has been quite clear with their open border policy. They've gone out to explain exactly what they mean by that it's not going to happen immediately, but this is a vision that the party has. And when you look on social media and even listen on the radio, some people would say that I don't want to vote for the EFF because I feel like the EFF is not putting quote-unquote South Africans first.
Yeah.
You look at the Patriotic Alliance and how they have been hampering on this particular campaign point around foreign nationals. And I wonder whether that has had a role at all in the outcomes that the EFF is experiencing currently.
Yeah, so the EFF over the last 3 or 4 years has really been pushed on this issue about foreigners in the country. So if you go all the way back to the emergence of Operation Dudula, which really went up against the EFF's position to force them into a stance that the EFF took of saying, you know, we are open, we are willing, there's a long-term plan here, there's this idea of African Pan-Africanism. The question facing the EFF is about how hard do you hold on to your principles, or how willing are you to be a bit more fickle on those and get electoral votes. I think it did impact their chances. The question then becomes, those who wanted a foreign party, right, who wanted a party who did not like foreigners or wanted to close borders, did they vote for another party? A really good proxy for that would be Action SA. Action SA being a party that has openly talked about closing the borders. And it's not as if those who don't like foreigners massively went towards Action SA, for instance. We know they've gone to the PA, but there's very specific reasons for that in a particular area of the country. So yes, it could have hurt their chances. I'm not sure it would have hurt it to the extent that they've had essentially possibly zero growth this election, right? Which would be an awful outcome for them if that was the case.
I'm joined in our studio by Dr. Tapelo Tselapedi. He's, of course, a political analyst to break down things for us. So thank you so much, Doc, for joining us.
Thank you.
What's your feeling around those big parties that have lost ground in this year's election relative to the last election? Do you think that some of their leaders may actually have to be spoken to or removed? Because obviously there's going to have to be an introspection around where the party went wrong, why it fell short, and it could be a number of reasons, but leadership could be one of them.
Look, I think, you know, not all parties will have to introspect. If you're looking at the DA, I think there's a lot of patting on the back for them, or them, you know, patting themselves. I think on the part of your, of course, Rise and Zanzi, but the major ones, ANC and the EFF. ANC obviously came out of an elective conference, so that's done. There's now discussions, at least outside of the ANC that we know, discussions around potentially an NGC. That how then do they look at the positioning of their leadership. But similarly, we have the EFF that's heading towards their own elective conference, I think in December. So they need to have a discussion principally about how they position their image in the public.
Yeah.
And how they package their communication around policies. There needs to be a lot more nuanced take, and that may require different leadership. But just bear in mind that, at least in the context of the ANC, it may be an issue that already, given the configurations of factions inside the ANC, they may have already been people who are against the current leadership, and that may use this opportunity, obviously, to take him out, have a different leadership. Remember, that's also then tied to the issue around coalitions. Who do you partner up with, whether the DA, EFF or MK? So depending on the outcomes of those sort of discussions, if they do, and I think if they're genuine about a renewing of the party, then certainly they're going to have to look at those leadership and then look at coalition politics.
Sticking with the EFF, where do you think they went wrong? Because they did very well in 2019, you know, they picked up quite substantially, but then now it looks like they're ticking down and they're going to be the fourth largest party after MK rather than the third.
Look, I think the EFF historically has been doing well, at least in the last sort of, you know, elections, and they're one of the few political parties that are offshoots of the ANC that have been able to sustain themselves. So financially, coherent leadership as well, so and organizationally to have a footprint among the provinces of the country. I think that's been quite important. But obviously the disruption here has been on the part of MK, and I think that's been obviously a major problem there. But one, or let me just say two things, one of which we discussed earlier on is around some of the practical objectives of their own policy proposals that they put forward. Is that pragmatic given our own budget or, you know, state coffers? But I think the other issue is around issues of migration and how do they deal with potentially, whether you want to look at immigration policy, if you want to look at it under the rubric of xenophobia. But I think the packaging there has not been well. There have been other leaders of the EFF that have better articulated that position. I think some of the sort of nonchalant engagement with which you saw the president or CIC engaging with ordinary citizens has shown, in a sense, disregard for voters. You can't say you don't care about Limpopo, you don't care about Gauteng, and that you're an internationalist. I think one obviously has to be grounded, and I think there's been that lag. If I may say just one more point, what's important about the EFF in my view is that they've managed to join the issue around identity politics, in other words, anti-racist position, and together with a class position about working class or being pro-working class. So I think it would be sad if they don't deal with the issues around renewal and leadership and packaging their policies, right? Because I do think this may be this is a temporary setback. I don't think this is a permanent setback, but it depends how they reflect on this moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
They say to you, hi, hey, Malema wants to do away with borders. Hey, Malema is going to bring people here. They are going to come to South Africa. One, there are no borders in Europe. There are no borders in Europe. You can wake up in Italy and go and eat breakfast in Britain and have your lunch in Spain. No issue. They have no borders.